This week on Make Better Wealth Decisions, Sam Leichtman. What are the concerns for millennials and what kind of advice can millennial advisors provide for the next generation? Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast that explores how financial advisors' blind spots can harm your investments. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. In this podcast, we'll provide advice on how you can achieve better outcomes by maximizing investments and minimizing taxes. Let's put our thinking caps on as we consciously decide to get smarter about our money. In this episode, you will learn how overconfidence is a problem for young investors, what biases they have and how they might be overcome, and finally, how young investors are using things like FHSAs in their financial planning. Stick around. Sam Leichtman is a CFP professional and the founder of a wealth management firm that specializes in millennials, which is Millennial Wealth Advisors. He's also a new dad, and he's built up a social media following of close to 90,000 followers on all platforms. He has a team of 6 across the country working on their mission to create and implement financial plans that allows millennials to thrive. Sam, welcome.
Thanks so much, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm wondering if we could begin by having you tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into the business? Tell us about the clients you serve, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I got into the business because I saw that the banks didn't really care about me until I had money to basically be able to invest with them. When I first started, fresh out of high school, 18 years old, the first thing they sold me was not a tax-free savings account, was not an RRSP or investment plan or savings plan. They sold me a credit card. And that really actually got me into some trouble because I had not learned anything about personal finance in high school, which I know they're starting to teach now, which is fantastic. But I did not have any of that education behind me. And so that really frustrated me because when I went back to my banker to ask them, hey, is there anything I can do? I've got like $1,000 in credit card debt. How can I, this is really causing me anxiety and stress. Literally, I got laughed at. It's like, as if it was nothing. It's not a big deal. Just go make money. You'll be fine. But it was causing me a lot of financial stress. And so what I ended up doing, like most people, I decided to join the industry instead of, right? But realistically, I had an opportunity to get in as a teller at a credit union. And one of the things that really impacted me there was the ability to learn how to make better financial decisions for myself. Because I felt like I was in a position where the financial market was just that it was going to be, I was just the recipient of a bunch of sales pitches. But that nothing was really helping me get ahead financially. So I figured I'll learn this myself so I can help myself and, maybe help some others along the way. And that was my intro into finance. At 19 years old, I was a teller, and then worked my way up at 21 to be a financial advisor, selling products like credit cards, savings accounts, those types of things. Although one of the things I always just made sure I focused on was that, if it's a young person, the first thing we do was set up a savings account for them, right? Because just understanding my story and what led me there. And so at 21, I became the youngest financial advisor in my company, credit union. It was about 1,000 employees there. But I felt like I'd really started to fall in love with, wealth management and financial planning. I just started my CFP designation. And there wasn't really a path forward for me at that place for investments in financial planning. And so what I decided to do was go more on the independent side. I joined a larger financial planning and mutual fund company where I could start my own business. And from there, I built a book of business, a book of clients, working mostly with first-time home buyers. Again, people in my generation, I'm 30 years old. So mostly people at the time, we were 22, 23 years old at the time. In Saskatchewan, housing was pretty affordable. So we were trying to buy houses at that point in time. So I really set my sights on helping people buy their first home using the RSP home buyers plan, making sure they had the right life insurance in place for that. And then by 25, I ended up getting my CFP designation. And at 26, I decided, this was when COVID first hit, I realized that, there's multiple layers of support in my current structure that I'm paying for that I don't really need. I have my CFP. I got pretty good at financial planning. And so I decided, I think it's time to go independent. And so that's when I truly went independent, start my own business to focus on working with millennials. And yeah, here we are today.
So the backstory is interesting. I think it's funny because the sort of horror story. I was just seeing David Chilton on social media talking about same sorts of things. Where a lot of people, when they just start, they get a credit card. It's like everything is free because they don't have to pay immediately. And so the problem that you talk about is a fairly universal one. Thank you for your backstory because you're obviously one of the people who came out of it stronger and better for having gone through everything. I'm wondering if you can maybe shift a little bit to your client base now and maybe talk to us about how they what their experiences are. Do they mirror yours? And I suppose I'm asking how millennial clients in general, very, very broad brushstrokes, differ from more traditional, often older, often richer clients with the problems they have and the things they expect.
Yeah, it's a very good question. What we find, and during my time at my prior firm, we didn't necessarily only work with millennials, so we worked with a lot of retirees there. So it did give me some good insight into working with pre-retirees and retirees, and now focusing almost solely on millennials. I can really see those distinctions. And so, in regards to your first question, I think that, there's obviously some that have mirrored the situation that I found myself in. But we also have to understand that millennials are, into their 30s and even early 40s right now. So a lot of them have come out of that. What we find the biggest distinctions are between, the older generations and millennials is that the older generations have always had this structure of going to financial advisors. They've always had, a very strong background in, okay, we need to, pay an RSP to be invested in these, well positioned products, mutual funds, those types of things. But with the millennial generation, I mean, we've been inundated on the robo advice side, right? Introduced to that so early on, right? DIY investing, self investing in individual securities, ETFs, whatever we can kind of find and whatever influencer is telling us is good to buy this time around. And so what I find almost exclusively when I bring a new client into the firm is that they've either DIY'd the majority or all of their portfolio in the past. And when we look at their portfolio, I call it like a buffet, right? Because this looks good, I'm going to take that. I'm going to buy that fund. This looks good, I'm going to buy this ETF. And they kind of just build it all into one, and there's overlap. There's a bunch of, owning the same products 3 or 4 times over. There's no real thought or construction behind their portfolios. And that leads to obviously risk from the stock market side of things. So I would say like one of the biggest differences we find is that in working with pre-retirees and retirees, they've had decades of financial advice behind their belt. They know what a good financial advisor is and what it isn't. Often the people we're working with, this is their first time seeing a financial professional outside of the bank, right? And someone that isn't just going to try to sell them a product. And so when we try to provide that, as independent as we can be, financial picture of their portfolio and say, hey, you're owning the same thing with these 3 different funds, and you don't really need to be owning all 3. And this one's all the way out in left field. And like, why are we owning this? And there's no real, I just thought it looked good in the moment. So we were able to come in and help with portfolio reconstruction on that front. And there's a whole different financial decision making as well that I sure we'll get into in this podcast as well. But that's the main difference we see just on the first kind of intro to new clients.
Could you maybe offer your thoughts on how savvy they are as a result of having been DIY investors, for better or worse, and perhaps how a typical client of yours might differ from a cohort, someone with the same demographics, but maybe isn't working with a financial advisor?
Yeah, I would say a lot of people we work with miss the forest for the trees. They're very educated on like what this specific product does, right? Like this ETF will invest in the Nasdaq. This ETF will invest in the S&P 500. And I know what the S&P 500 is. I know what all those companies are. We find that there's a very high level of financial literacy in terms of like knowing the underlying of what they're invested in, but then they just don't ever take a step back and look at, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be all in the US, or maybe I shouldn't be all in this industry, right? So that's definitely one thing that I would say that they're financially savvy, but sometimes they're just too in the weeds of what their decision making is. So I think that's again a difference, right? We all can talk to, like, I talk to my dad all the time. I find that he's much more inclined to go with really good steady Canadian bank stocks or something like that, and just
Mhm.
like enjoy the dividends, right? That's definitely a difference I find in our generation is been such a big influence and push on, like, buy the S&P 500 and chill. um it's not the worst strategy out there. There's definitely worse ones.
Right.
But that's not right for everyone. And for a lot of people, I would say.
What biases would you say you're seeing? Because I think a lot and talk a lot about behavioral biases that people have. What would you say are the main behavioral biases that millennials have?
Overconfidence is a big one.
Hmm.
Um, we meet with a lot of people who are invested in something specific because they like the brand, or they really feel that, like, they know exactly the way the market's gonna go. And so that's definitely something they have an emotional attachment to it, right? They want to hold on to it. I would say overconfidence is a really, really big, almost like almost every client we meet with is super confident in their portfolio. We ask them that. Who's like, how confident are you that you're invested the right way? And they'll say, well, I know that most of my stuff is invested really, really well. I think it's going to do this. I really want to hold on to it. And then when we get into the weeds of the actual portfolio, we find it's a pretty big mess.
What kind of hacks would you recommend people use to curb their enthusiasm and to overcome the overconfidence so they could maybe be a little more sanguine, a little more balanced in their viewpoint? What sorts of things do you do other than what you just shared, and what would you
Yeah.
recommend people do in general to curb their overconfidence?
Um, it's a good question, because I think that approach does need to be taken fairly individually. Because everyone's a little bit different on that. But we work with a lot of people who we encourage to offload that to someone who is, qualified and capable of managing a portfolio well, right? And so what that often ends up doing for clients, and we pitch it to them this way: we say, hey, listen, you're a business owner, or you're in tech. And those are like, the majority of people who work with our business owners and people in technology. It's like, you've got a family, you've got your career, you're very career oriented, you've got your business to run. Like, you shouldn't be worrying about this stuff, because there are really good solutions out here that we can utilize that can take this off your plate, so that you don't need to be constantly worried about where the market's going to go. You can be dead focused on the things that matter in life, like growing your business, taking care of your family, traveling. And so we encourage people to just, prioritize what's important here, right? Obviously, returns in your portfolio are super important, right? But are you the best person necessarily to make those decisions? Do you have the time to research everything? Do you have the time to make calls and watch the market? Most of the people we meet with, they don't, right? And so they're working on limited information. And so that's where we often say, like, hey, listen, if this isn't your priority, you don't want to be a trader, you don't want to be an investor full time, which is really what it's going to take if you want to have a good portfolio. Like, offload this to someone that you trust is going to do a good job, is going to charge you a fair amount,
Uh,
and not dilute your return significantly. And then you can focus on the things in life that really matter, and we'll take it from there.
wonder if we can shift to public policy and the way laws change and the way millennials process
Mhm.
laws as they change. So I'm thinking specifically about the federal budget that passed a few months ago, with an increase in the inclusion rate for capital gains in excess of $250,000. Virtually none of your clients, and quite possibly literally none of your clients, will be affected directly by this. You may have some who have a parent or a grandparent who are directly affected, but chances are a millennial client aren't. They don't really care one way or the other about a change in the capital gains inclusion rate. Do they ever weigh in? Do when you're speaking with your clients, does it ever come up? Do they ever express an opinion? And if so, what is it? And what's their view on these things? I guess my broader concern is intergenerational equity. What are they thinking about that?
Yes, question. I would say that, some of the people that we work with definitely are in a situation that they'll get affected because they own businesses, and that exemption isn't available for business owners, at least within the corporation, right? There's still
Right.
like the exemption on selling shares of your business. So some of them definitely do get affected by it, but realistically, John, like, when we're looking at the 30, 40-year time horizon, this isn't money that needs to be available tomorrow. This isn't money that's going to get hit like really quickly, right? So essentially what we're really telling clients is like, this doesn't really change what we're doing here in your investment portfolio. Let's stick to it. Let's stick the course. We're not trying to buy things and sell them. We're not trying to like, make short-term decisions here based on policy that's just been introduced. So that's been our message to our clients, unless there's, prior to, obviously this is irrelevant now, but prior to June 25th, right, there was the opportunity to maybe make some changes prior to the introduction of it. We didn't make any changes for clients because the vast majority of our clients, even in their business, the money that they're invested, it's invested for their retirement, right? And so that's really where, that could have impacted our clients, but didn't. And so what we've kind of heard from clients is, number one, they don't really understand it all that well. So they haven't made too big of a fuss about it. We've tried to educate them on what does this mean for you long term, because it's important that we just know about that. And then I would say that the one thing when we're dealing with clients that have wealthy families that they come from, they do understand it quite a bit. And they also understand that that means that, my parents' $7 million estate might now be $6.5 million or $6.3 million, right? They're still getting they're still getting like,
Plenty of
obviously
money.
they're getting the money. It's not something they necessarily had to work for. They're not complaining about it. Putting aside my personal views on it, that's what we're hearing from
Right.
clients. And so it doesn't seem to be something that they're going to have an impact on soon. I mean, we'll see what happens in the next 5 to 7 years. But right now we're just saying, hey, listen, one way or another, it doesn't really matter. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Let's talk about a couple other things on the public policy front. FHSAs, first time home savings accounts. How they're now a few years old, I think 2 or 3 years old. How are millennials reacting to that opportunity that wasn't previously available to them?
Yeah, they're utilizing it. It's huge take up. I mean, when they were first introduced, like about a month before, I think it was been budget 2023 that they officially were. I think April 2023 was when they were allowed to open. Most banks and big institutions didn't promote until the end of the year. But I made a video on it on social media. And they got over 1 million views. Like people
Wow.
were like they were excited about this account. And obviously, when you think about it, there's a good reason why. It's tax-free in, tax-free out, right? It's the only account that you can do that with. There's no repayment requirements. And there's the opportunity for future planning for people who decide that, they don't want to buy a house, right? Which we're seeing a lot more of, where people are just okay renting for a really, really long time. So there's planning opportunities there. We're seeing huge uptake in it. I would say it mirrors the TFSA in terms of where people are putting their money in the in terms of when they're younger. Like obviously TFSA is a really popular one, but FHSA is almost getting to that same level.
Okay, so one last thing, and that is something that does not directly affect millennials, and that is the Canada Pension Plan and old age
Yeah.
security. So it's a topical thing, but again, it's topical insofar as when people talk about it, the overlay is one of intergenerational equity. And I personally am concerned as a person who's closer to taking money out after having spent some time putting money in, unlike you or some of your clients, they're still quite a ways away. I'm a ways away too, but it's getting closer. I worry that we have a lot of Canadians that are doing very, very well that are getting this money. And I also worry that there are a lot of millennials that are going to have a tough time moving out of their parents' basement and could maybe use a bit of a leg up. Do millennials, in your experience, feel any kind of disillusionment, or do they feel they've been at all hard done by the social safety net as it exists today, given that it may actually be exacerbating intergenerational inequity?
So just so I understand your question better, so I can give a good answer. So
Sure.
your question's around like how the CPP benefits for seniors are viewed
So
by
here, let
millennials.
me let me let me clarify.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so a couple of things. First off, you don't get your clawback starting until you're over 90,000 in
yeah.
annual income, and it's not fully clawed back until you're way, way, way into six digits. Some people would say that's overly generous for a certain generation.
Mm.
Meanwhile, we have a demographic time bomb where we're far, far away from replacement rate. Right now, the number of children per childbearing age woman is about 1.5. Replacement rate is 2.1. We're at the point where a lot of these people who are paying in and will spend their entire lives paying in may not be getting something quite as generous down the road. I'm not talking in the next 5 or 10 years, but maybe in the next 35 or 40 years, the plan may not be quite as solvent, and there may be some people who are a bit put out by that. And I'm just wondering if people are getting ahead of it in terms of the way they think about it.
Well, this is a great question. And obviously, one thing I will say is I'm not an expert actuary. I can't predict exactly how the Canada Pension Plan is going to stay solvent. I do know that when we look at rankings of the Canada Pension Plan globally, it's always in the top five, depending on what category you're looking at. But one of the things that we're talking to our clients about is creating, like, setting yourself up for self-reliance outside of those benefits. It's not like we're not going to counter, like actually factor them into your retirement income. We are, but are you set up as well with your personal assets? Because that's not going to be exactly what helps you retire. In terms of, like, okay, so the clawbacks being very on very high thresholds of income right now. I would say that I haven't had conversations with millennials that view that as an issue that actually affects their ability to live the life they want to live now. The main things we're hearing about are, I feel like housing's out of reach. I feel like I'm, and how they attribute that is in many different forms, depending on what side of the political spectrum they fall, as to the reasons why it's that way. But I would say that when we're talking about CPP, especially with the new enhanced CPP rules coming in, where if you're a business owner, you're going to contribute about $8,100 into the plan, where before you were doing about 7,700. The goal of the CPP, and this is what we tell people, it's going to replace about a third of your average working income by the time you're ready to retire. And having that is valuable. Obviously, we're seeing in the US, Social Security is set to run out at a certain point in time, which isn't good. I haven't looked at the numbers and see if that's happening with Canada, but I do know that Canada is ranked much higher in terms of pension management than the US is. So I do think that we've got a long ways to go before we need to start worrying about that. That's my opinion, without having, looked at the actuarial data or the numbers or anything like that. But what we're seeing is we're not seeing people attribute well, personally at least, I'm not seeing people attribute the way that social benefits are being paid out or not paid out right now as necessarily being affecting them negatively. It's more so the things of the market forces. Like, my wages aren't keeping up. My
Right.
house is going to be $1 million if I start a home in the GTA. And I really, like you mentioned, can't afford to get out of my parents' basement right now. And yeah, those are the bigger issues that we're seeing. How that connects with social issues, I'll leave for the politicians to try to grapple out and understand. But that's where that's what I'm seeing.
Okay, well, I have to ask because I have a background in public policy and public administration, and I really do believe that millennials are getting a bit of a rough go of it. And because you're working with millennials, I wanted to hear from you in terms of what you're hearing from your clients, and maybe I should be happy that they're not as concerned as I feared they might be. So that's good.
There's
I'd like to.
I will say this though, there is a lot of frustration. I think millennials just have a hard time figuring out where to land it.
Right.
Like when I'm doing a video on social media, doesn't matter what the video's on, we'll get a ton of comments from people about, like, how can anyone afford to save in this environment? How can anyone afford to do anything in this environment? There's frustrations, right? And naturally the place where the frustrations go is okay, well, who's creating policy right now that put us here without necessarily the ability to understand what happened before or what's currently going on. But there's a lot of, so I won't say like millennials aren't frustrated. There's a ton of frustration out there, but how to potentially say that it's because of this or this or this, they're just seeing the effects of it. They're not really seeing what is causing it at the moment.
Fair enough. Okay, I like to end with something I call decision time.
Sure.
If it was up to you, Sam, what's one thing you would recommend to help people make better financial decisions?
Well, you mentioned David Chilton. He's got some great books out there. One of the things I always encourage people to do is to read personal finance books, not the books that are created necessarily for financial advisors, but like behavioral decisions, behavioral finance is going to be such a leading indicator of your ability to make good decisions down the road. And so people like David Chilton, who talk specifically in the Canadian market about good behavioral decisions that you can make, read his books. There's other good books out there like Behavior Gap and things like that. So my advice to people is look at like where you can educate yourself, and just make sure that when you're in the process of making financial decisions, you at least understand the ramifications of what you're making. And try not to be driven by emotions, because those tend to lead people down the wrong way when it just specifically comes to finance decisions.
Sam, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been really enjoyable.
Awesome. Great to be here, John. I appreciate your time as well.
Okay, we're done.
Cool.
I will let you go. A couple things very quickly. Number one, I'm going to be posting this tomorrow, so I'll send you the links. Number two, I can't, forgive me. This is going to sound really bad, but I didn't think of this until after I started doing some more research about you, and then I saw what Design was putting on LinkedIn. I don't know if like you're basically the owner of Millen. Is that the way it works?
Under Millen Wealth. Yeah, I own the firm.
Okay. So great. Congratulations. I'm very, very happy for you, because it sounds like it's going really, really well. I just realized that Design is our view in terms of the way we do things is we're trying to do a lot of the same sort of stuff. Not me personally, but our management team is all very young. Almost all of our staff are millennials.
Okay.
And the business model is pretty much a 100% payout. You just pay a flat fee and you do things. So I don't know, talking about what you were saying a moment ago, if you're a business owner, how much time do you have to follow the market, that sort of thing. If you're the sort of person who wants to simplify your life by not having to actually run a company and hand that all off to someone else and still get a high payout rate, and I don't know what you're doing with your 6 associates or whatever, I would be happy to introduce you to the people at Design. And you know what? If you want to tell me to get bent, I'll get bent. But it just occurred to me, literally, it occurred to me in the past 2 or 3 days. So so there it is.
It's all good. I appreciate the offer. I mean, I love the business side. This is my bread and butter. I absolutely love building something from scratch. We have a CFA on staff, and he handles our portfolios and does the investment planning for our team. So we're set up to grow. But we're always open to hearing like options and what's out there on the market. But I'm not interested in offloading the business side. I love that side. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning. So I appreciate that though. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll let it go. I thought the odds were quite remote that you would be at all interested, but I felt that I owed it to me and to you to at least draw it to your attention. So great.
Oh, it's good. It's good. Well, I appreciate meeting. I've actually heard a lot about you and see you on social media as well. So
well, I'm not a star like you, but I'm an old fogey and I'm still fumbling my way around. I mean, I had to ask you how to go into things just so that I could record on Zoom, because I don't usually record on Zoom. I usually just use Zoom. And it's like, now that I'm switching technology for recording my podcast, I got to make sure I actually, get it saved for posterity so we didn't all waste our time. So thank you, Sam. I appreciate this. And we will be in touch, and it'd be great if we get together sometime and maybe have a beer.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right. Take care. I'm looking forward to the podcast coming out. We'll see you later.
Great. Take care.
John DeGuy is a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. The views expressed on this program are not to be construed as specific advice. It is recommended that you consult a qualified advisor before taking action. His books, The Professional Financial Advisor 4, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry, and Bullshift are available through Amazon and in bookstores throughout Canada. You can reach John at 647-POINT-STAND-UP. That's 647.782.6387 or at jdeguy@designsecurities.ca.